My name is Gabi. I'm a business analyst here at Cogent, and we have Edgar here with us, which is always our moderator. Edgar is an associate director here at Cogent. And we have Matthew today here with us. He would be the speaker, and the topic today is Snowflake versus traditional data warehousing, key differences and business benefits. Matthew will have a chance to introduce himself in a couple of minutes. In the meantime, if you have any questions during the whole event, if you want to say anything, you can either raise your hand or you can leave your comment on the chat section. We will take your questions. Edgar, over to you, and thank you again, everyone, for being here.
Sure, Gabby, thank you. Hello, everyone. So I think today it's going to be interesting because we will be reviewing how data warehousing helps us gather data from different sources and get insights from this data. And more importantly, how data warehousing has been evolving, right, through time, maybe from the original approaches where we had this on-prem kind of setup, and now how we are evolving into more sophisticated tools. Most probably having that in the cloud is a great option. But for that, of course, we would like and we would love to hear more from Matthew and his experience. And really looking forward to, delve into the conversation. So thank you once again, Matthew, for being here, and over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks everybody for joining. Thanks Edgar, thanks Gabby. So my name is Matthew Harris. Currently, I am a lead data engineer, and I've been in the data space now for about 5 years. I've ran several different data analytics, data science, and data engineering teams, and now focused more so on technical skills myself. So when we think about my background and how it relates to this, I've helped a couple of different products get off the ground, leveraging different data warehousing solutions, some of which were classically on Microsoft SQL servers, so talking about the on-prem capacity, and then others with Databricks or Snowflake capacity, some more cloud-based services. So I think we'll deep dive a little bit into kind of the variances and kind of the architectures that are a little bit different in how that we classically architected data, and then how that we architect it now for more data ready, more analytics ready insights, as well as being ready for AI and machine learning, because those are the two key topics in our news today.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. So we sometimes have participation speaking about AI, and as you mentioned very well, right? It's critical that the data first makes sense, that it's clean, and that you can actually classify it, label it, and use it in that case. So this is so relevant when we are talking about AI. And what if we start by understanding a bit more what would be the key differences that you notice or that we can notice when we speak about data warehousing on-prem and in the cloud? What would be the major advantages that we can see? And perhaps you may also see some some things that might not be that good if we take that approach. So could we start from there?
Yeah, so let's do a little bit of comparison. So classically on-prem, we've got to have a wide infrastructure, right? So your infrastructure on-premise, you've got to spin up multiple servers, you've got to have multiple database instances, and then you've got to maintain those. So the on-prem maintenance costs can be quite substantial, especially depending on how vast that your actual data infrastructure is. So, and then in comparison to a cloud infrastructure where most are SaaS hosted operations, right? There's little to no maintenance that needs to be done to the back end of those. It's more to the actual data itself through transformation layers or preparing it for analytics ready data. You have less of that infrastructure and that maintenance. Now let's kind of talk about from the perspective of how do we get that data from our source systems into more of an on-prem warehousing solution. Well, classically, we would have done things such as SQL replication or we may have leveraged some sort of base layer pipelines to move our data over through scripts or some sort of bash scripting, a PowerShell script, whatever the case may be. And that's how we use, or an SSS package. We could use various things to move our data over to an on-prem solution. Whereas, with that, our end goal is that the time the data gets into the warehouse, it's already analytical ready. So we've performed that transformation while that we're actually going through the process. So we're performing an ETL process, which is extract, transform the data, and then load it into the end result data warehouse, whether that's a SQL Server, an Oracle database, wherever the case may be, that we're actually warehousing that data at the end of the day. So in a more modern paradigm, what we're doing is we're sustaining that raw layer of data so that way that it can be leveraged later for any sort of model training. Or if we just need to go back to the core pillars or the core raw data set in order to see exactly what's occurring if we're trying to find more insights. Whereas previously we would have lost that in that transformation layer, we're now going more towards an ELT concept, which is extract, load, then transform. So we load it into the warehouse, and then we create data layers. We create, whether that's a raw harmonized to consumption, or we're going more classically with the medallion architecture, which is bronze, silver, and gold. We're creating layers in which that we can see better with the lineage of how this data is being transformed into analytical ready data. And we can also have a little bit more control over how those react. Also, classically with on-prem, especially in an ETL concept, schema drift was a huge problem. So your base layer schema changes a little bit, and then everything just breaks, right? Whereas with our more newer concepts, a lot of these more modern tools can actually handle some sort of schema drift. They can actually handle some sort of variance, whereas our classic tooling, it was just dead on arrival and that sort of thing would happen. So it's just a lot of different constructs and a lot of different methodologies that you're kind of just molding into a more modern architecture versus that legacy thought process of we just need to get the data over here so that way we can use it. Now it's how do we get the data over here so we can use it not only for analytical ready purposes, but for any other purpose that we need, such as building models or anything like that, and be able to be more fluent with our data and create that single source of truth.
Okay. You touched very interesting points here, and one that caught my attention was since let's say that the paradigm is changing, right? And you are no longer replicating the complete data set into the warehouse. What's the role of architecting the data in terms of the structures that you need to actually make use of it once that it is inside the warehouse? I mean, is it
Sure.
would you call it a simple activity, or what's the secret behind it, let's say?
So these can get pretty advanced, right? Because we think about data, and a lot of people, when they think data, they think textual or they think numeric. So we're just talking about a value that's living in a database, right? But that's not always the case. We have structured and we have unstructured data. So if we're talking about structured data, we may ingest a CSV file, we may ingest a database table or something like that. But then we also may want to look at raw documents. So let's talk about a PDF file or a docx file. So how do we take that into consideration when thinking about our data infrastructure as a whole? So now with the classic paradigm, that was very difficult to ingest a PDF. Now we've got tooling to where that we can do that more simplistically, especially with the power of cloud. When you think about how much actual infrastructure you need to move 1 trillion rows of data on a SQL server or classic, something like that, it takes a long time to process that many rows of data, right? So your scalability is limited to what hardware that you can throw at it. Whereas with more cloud-based solutions, you have more elasticity and scalability because you can auto scale up or down depending on what is actually required for the job. And you can also match your warehousing sizes to what's actually required for the job at hand. So you're more so looking at tooling that can then fit the mold of what you're looking at versus trying to take this classic tooling and then A and B test to where that you can actually physically get it to where you need it to be in order to handle the load that you're looking at.
Hmm. Okay, very interesting. And you also mentioned something else about the data lineage, right? That you're able to track from where it is coming. So in practice, how does that work? I mean, like, is it like you really get to go all the way to the source to track this particular piece of information, or is it like it stops at a certain level? How far can you get, and how useful is that when you are actually, operating the data warehouse?
Yeah, I think you can get extraordinarily granular these days, Edgar, because of the tooling that's available to us. Classically, let's say that we develop an SSIS package and we're trying to move data from Microsoft SQL Server, manipulate it into another warehousing server that we've built up. We've got to go through every single step of that SSIS package and open it in order to view a full lineage. You can see the jobs, but getting down to the more granular layers, it takes time and it takes a lot of research. Whereas with more modernized tools, we can actually open like a GUI interface and you can see exactly each step of the process that allows you to then be able to identify where any issues might lie. So when you think about it from a data engineer's perspective, we're a lot more empowered these days in order to be able
Data
to be
warehousing means
successful
is it
with that.
something related to the DB?
Sorry,
I don't know
but
if that was a question. I'm not sure if that was a question, but okay. Let's see. We can get it back. Sorry, I think we interrupted you at the end. Matthew, perhaps if you can recap that last part.
Oh yeah. So talking about data lineage from the perspective of getting data from a source system into a warehousing solution like Snowflake, there's several different tools that you can use. Snowflake offers a lot of good lineage views from if you're leveraging such things as Snowpipes or any sort of their proprietary ETL tools or ELT tools rather. But with leveraging tools like Matillion or Fivetran or whatever the case may be for the tooling that you've got a lot more flexibility these days in order to see that data lineage and see how the transformations are actually running throughout the pipeline versus just a classic. You would have to do a lot of varied research in order to achieve that same layer of detail.
Okay. And I can see that when you are talking about the Snowflake, you really kind of reflect that you like it. So I'm just wondering what are the best things for you about the tool? What do you enjoy from Snowflake compared to other tools, perhaps?
Yeah, there's a lot of good benefits that to working with Snowflake. I think one of the major benefits that Snowflake brings to the table is ease of use. You don't have to be a Python expert. You don't have to be a SQL expert. You don't have to be an expert in any specific tech stack. They work with all different cloud providers. They offer Python notebooks. They offer SQL worksheets. They offer Java. They offer all sorts of different coding languages, so that way it can appeal to an engineer of any sort of coding background. Also, just the interface is extraordinarily easy to use. Shout out, they also have dark mode, so it doesn't burn my retinas every time that I open up the website. So I really appreciate that. But from an options perspective, one of the coolest things that I've ever seen about a cloud warehousing solution is something Snowflake has called time travel. So let's say, Edgar, you go in and you run a query and you drop 1,000 rows out of a core database table and you're like, oh no, what do I do? Do I have to go back and compare this table to what's in the source system to try and figure out the delta of what I just did? Or can I actually leverage the time travel function to actually just time travel that table to before you ran that query, so that way you completely rectify the issue that was just created? And that's a real situation, especially when you think about CDC. So change data capture from a SQL server loads data within a few seconds. So even if something like that were to happen in the core database, which we shouldn't be touching, but we all do. So let's say we drop that 1,000 rows out of that core database, we're still able to leverage Snowflake to grab that delta and then reinsert it up to the core database, which is really cool. I actually had a very similar situation to that with a user. So that's something that comes top of mind. I really like the security parameters, being able to enforce MFA and work with different MFA carriers, work with different identity carriers. So that way you're not locked into a singular entity that comes out of the box. They offer out of the box solutions, but you don't have to stick with them. You can adjust to what your needs are. You can also do different things like use private link. Do you want your Snowflake environment to be behind a specific network? Then that's an option. So just tons of security that is being offered. I know probably most people on the call remember that recently there was an issue, but Snowflake addressed it very well, and they brought out some new features such as being able to globally enforce MFA across your environment to try to rectify some of the issues that can occur. Now, I don't think that's a Snowflake specific issue. That's any platform that you go to use that's SaaS based. People want to attack it. That's just the way it is. So what they're trying to do is reduce that attack plane, and that's been really refreshing to see. I think also a couple of other good benefits of Snowflake is that it's scalable extraordinarily. You've got multiple different warehousing sizes. You don't actually have to stick to one specific warehouse direction. You can scale it up, scale it down, scale it to the side, depending on how much compute or how much data that you're trying to put through it. So your throughput can be adjusted very easily. It's very elastic. And overall, it's just been a good user experience. Again, I've also used Databricks. Databricks is a great tool too. But the contrast is Databricks is definitely from what the users that I was using it with, we all kind of felt that it was definitely took more of an advanced user in order to be able to leverage it. So I think Snowflake brings to the table a little bit more ease of use.
Okay. And you mentioned a few times about the scalability of the tool, right? And for the audience to have like an idea on the volume of information that we are speaking about, could you tell us what has been like the maximum amount of data that you have taken into Snowflake? An approximate, of course, perhaps in terms
an
of
8-hour timeline, I believe 500 million rows.
100 million rows.
500 million.
500 million. Wow, that's huge. Okay,
yeah.
Okay, and also for reference, how long did it take, like for the tool to be able to process this amount of information that is just huge?
It was immediately available. The only downside of why it took so long is because it was coming out of SQL Server, and SQL Server is slow. So once that it actually was able to reach Snowflake, though, it's immediately available. Took no time to actually process it. It was just trying to get it from Microsoft SQL Server was the issue. So when you try to go move millions upon millions of rows out of an operational database, which you shouldn't be doing anyways, but with concurrent requests, it takes a long time to get it out of the SQL Server. Very little time to get it into Snowflake.
Cool. That's amazing. Okay. And let's say once that the data is available, right? Inside in this case, Snowflake, what kind of operations are common with this data? I mean, what would be what the business side of things would see coming out of Snowflake? as the result of this storage and processing? What would be common patterns, perhaps? How would the business people see it?
Sure. So there's a few different use cases. I think a major use case for Snowflake's marketing data, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to come to that common customer record. Many times your ERPs, your CRMs, they're loaded with duplicates, right? So you've got, let's take Gabby, for example. There could be, 100,000 Gabbies in there. Well, maybe we only have like 25,000, right? That are true real people. They're just duplicated throughout your system. So trying to come to that common customer record, so that way that you can adequately market to those individuals, that's a major use case. A lot of financial use cases, so that way that you can do deeper dives and analytics on your accounting. We used it a lot for NetSuite. And that was really impactful. Suite Analytics is good, but it's definitely not to the level of what you can do with Snowflake and layer Power BI or Sigma on top of it. So that way that you can actually build out more customizable items. It's also a great way, if anybody on the call deals with a lot of marketing items, they would know that GUA, Google Universal Analytics, just went end of life back in July. So, and you were no longer going to be able to have access to that data. So now everyone switched to GA4, which is Google Analytics 4, and that's what Google's going forward with. But if you didn't have a good place to store and analyze that marketing data come July, you were going to be in a real world of pain. And then, kind of transitioning just a little bit, just from a business use case, we see a lot of talk about the investment that you make in analytics or the investment that you make in data warehousing. But a lot of times people forget that the ROI in analytics isn't tangible day one, right? That's not the case. You don't put it to a dashboard out there and immediately that day one get that value. What it is going to provide in value, though, is what we would call the hidden ROI of analytics. And the hidden ROI of analytics is being empowered to make better decisions about your business. We never recommend that you go, hey, this isn't doing well, let's shut it down. That's not the case. That's not our goal in analytics. Our goal in analytics is how that we can improve the process in order to achieve our milestones or achieve our goals in the long term. This isn't a solution that's going to, day one, go ahead and give you some sort of, it's not something you're selling unless you're a vendor of some sort, but it's something that you're going to be able to improve upon your operations with. And that can count for millions of dollars in opportunity, especially when you talk about labor and labor costs and being able to more accurately predict. So now talking more about the AI realm, right? So Snowflake Cortex offers a lot of different features and functions for AI out of the box. You don't even have to build the models. Talk about their document AI. You don't have to build a model. All you do is upload your documents, a few clicks of a button to actually identify the fields that you want, and the model runs on its own. They've recently introduced some AI chatbot functions into Snowflake, which help users who maybe aren't familiar with SQL or maybe need some support with Python. So that way that they can get real-time interactions to get support with what functions and what actions they're needing to complete, which makes this a more holistic platform, because if they weren't doing that, they're probably going to be on ChatGPT in the other tab. So, trying to bring everything into the platform that can then support the end user is, I believe, their ultimate goal. And I think they've done a good job of it from a tooling perspective.
Yeah, I'm just doing some notes here because it really looks like they are, like hearing their customers and really, like innovating on some of the latest advancements. And as you were mentioning, right, they are trying to integrate it all in one, so you get this single point of contact, and that's great. So there's a comment from John. He's saying, there's also a native connector between GA4 and Snowflake. So
Yep. And I just started using it. What's cool about that is that you can actually, when you go into GA4 and try to do analytics in Google, it will actually show you the back end of the report for the metrics and dimensions that it's actually leveraging. And when you connect that natively between Snowflake and GA4, you can select those same metrics and dimensions. And it's a whole lot easier to build out that same dashboard if you want to include other data sets to go along with it, because of course you can't do that in GA4. It's specifically locked to that data set. But with leveraging Snowflake on top of it, then, for example, a resort management company can take that information of the traffic and revenue off of their sites and then attach that to some analytics surrounding room nights and reservations to be able to actually see what that traffic's truly bringing through. So yeah, good shout out there, John. I've already been using it and it's really cool.
nice. All right. So we spoke about all the benefits that we have in the platform, but do you see any shortcomings, any things that can still be improved, or what would be your take there? Would you try to modify the product in any way so it fits better your and the customer data needs?
Yeah, so I think, when we talk about data warehousing in essence, what are we trying to do? What's our goal? Our goal is to break down the barriers and silos from different departments, whether that's marketing, whether that's sales, whether it's operations, finance, so on and so forth. Because in any large enterprise, we've got all of these subsets of organizations, right? And people don't always look at it that way. They're like, oh, that's one big company. But within that company, there's several subsets. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring that data together so that way that we can actually do holistic analytics across the organization, because we want to be able to understand how every piece fits together and how they can work more effectively through this process. So with what Snowflake does today, it's a great tool in order to do that with. I think as the product progresses, it's going to become, today Snowflake has some base level dashboarding capacity inside of the application. And it's really useful for security audits and such things, because you really just need the basics, because most people are going to pull that into a Sigma or a Power BI or some sort of Tableau or whatever the case may be for your visualizations, right? Or maybe paginated reports. Maybe you're running out of SSRS. Maybe you're running paginated Power BI. Maybe you're doing something else. There's 1,000 different tools out there that we could go through that all do similar items and provide similar services. But I think what would be really cool is if there was more of a nested way to bring some of that tooling inside of the application, so that way that it can be more of a holistic approach. Like I said, you can build dashboards in there today. They're good for smaller tasks. But once you get very advanced, then of course you're going to rely more so on more of a visualization tool, which is no real true shortcoming. It's just something that could be enhanced in the future to just provide a more holistic experience. But for the form and function of what the tools are intended to do today, it operates extraordinarily well and has the features and functions that you would look for in a solution that would then lean itself to be a data warehousing or data cloud solution.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So based on what you mentioned, right? You mentioned first that it's not about getting value out of analytics like from day one, right? And then we also mentioned that one of the functions that we are trying to achieve by leveraging the data warehouses is to take down these barriers between departments. So things start to make sense in terms of how one particular feature that we run in one department is affecting another feature, right, in another department. Do you think that in the future it might be possible to actually have all of these pieces together, perhaps through some other technology, maybe AI, and kind of get this real concept of the company working as a whole, but kind of getting visualized through data as if it was, maybe driving a car or something like that. I mean, to that level where you can actually understand each aspect and what is happening and what would be based on that the better decisions to make. I mean,
Yeah. So I think the
okay,
vision here for most organizations needs to be that this is a marathon, not a sprint.
okay.
So, in any large scale organizations, you could have 50 plus source systems that you're working on because each of those data silos has various systems that they work with. And then they don't really probably, for the most part, communicate with the systems in the other area, which then don't communicate with systems in the other area. And it's a domino effect, right? You've got all of these disparate systems sitting everywhere. So, when you think about how to get that view of the organization, bringing that data together in a tool like Snowflake can allow you to do that, but it's going to take time. You're going to have to invest the time not only in the tool, but in the business process to understand how each one of these functions occurs. Because getting the data to Snowflake's pretty easy, and they've made it that way on design. It's easy to use. It's easy to get your data there. The lift is getting those business stakeholders all in the same room to be able to discuss how each of those have an impact or what metrics have an impact on their organization. What are the KPIs that they are tracking that's important to them? And then how do we calculate those to be effective and be something actionable? Because we could come up with a list of 10,000 different things that we want to be able to see in a dashboard. But is
Mhm.
that actionable, right? So we want to get to a state of where we're having business discussions about the data and then be able to bring that to light. So many times we go in with a quote unquote feeling. We feel like this process is working. We feel like this department's performing well. But when the data doesn't tell us that, then we're like, oh, that must be wrong. We did something wrong. The engineering's wrong, the transformation's wrong. But what we've got to be open to is letting the data tell the story. So of course we need to validate that we're calculating metrics correctly, that we have done our due diligence on making sure that what we've pulled is accurate. But at the same time, we have to be diligent in the fact of the matter of, hey, this is what it's telling us. How can we act upon it? Not just act upon what our feelings are about the organization or about the department or about the specific process, because we could be completely wrong. In the now, we're getting information that's conflicting to us. So sometimes we have a bit of a tendency to be a little resistant to that. It's the resistance to
Mhm.
change, right? So there's some
Right.
change management aspects that come along with going down this journey, because that's what it is. It's a journey. You go from not having a warehousing solution to having a warehousing solution. Then how do you use it? And how do you use it effectively?
Right. Yeah. I think that as in many other processes, right, that are uh, close to technology, there's always this factor, this resistance to change, and the way in which, as a consultant, for example, you are able to deal with that would also determine the success of the projects. So it's great that you mentioned it. In that area, do you have any particular tips that you can share with us? What has been like the most effective way to deal with resistance to change for you?
Yeah, so there's a few different methodologies that you can use when it comes to change management. And I think
Mhm.
the number one thing that sometimes we don't do a great job of as organizations is we forget the why. Why are we
Mhm.
doing this? And that's the most important thing to communicate. We can communicate the what all day long, but that doesn't create acceptance. It doesn't create buy-in. So we have to find a way to communicate the why effectively. We have to find those individuals who can be agents of change and who will support it. And then it has to be supported across the leadership team and then reinforced. So many times we implement changes within organizations and they fail because number one, we didn't communicate why right. Number two, we didn't have any agents of change. No one's supporting it. And number three, it's never followed up on. So how many times do you get a memo of something that we should be doing, and then 2 weeks later, no one's even paying attention to it because no one's talking about it anymore? So it's that continual reinforcement of, hey, this is the process that we're going with. Here's why we're doing it. Here's how it benefits not only us as an organization, but how it benefits the person. Because people take that to more of a personal level than how it benefits the overall organization. So I think as much as you can, make it about how it can impact that person. Hey, if we're able to optimize, grow revenue, hey, this can grow bonus structure, this can do this, can do that. I think talking sometimes about the art of the possible is a strategic move.
That actually rang a bell, in my current path, because sometimes I have to deal a little bit with sales, and that particular part that you were mentioning about how things are impacting the person, right, at that level, and perhaps how that will make them feel. That also has to do, right? And it really kind of made sense that sometimes when we are technical, we tend to forget about these kind of things, right? We tend to focus on the newest systems, the newest technology, and it. Of course we do, because that's also amazing to see and fun to deal with, right? To play with. But there's also this human component that we really need to take into account, and that in the end pays off in this kind of situations. And I would say pretty much every other interaction that we have with people. So it's great that you mentioned it. And now that we are talking about change management, something that is, I think, very common as well is whenever we talk about data and the cloud, there's always some resistance, right? Because people tend to think like, this is my company data. How am I supposed to open it? And, like somewhat or somehow get it into the cloud where it will be vulnerable and at the same time maybe visible by other people. So what has been your experience there in trying to go from on-prem systems and dealing with that resistance as well?
Yeah, I think security has to be a top concern, right? Just for every organization that has any sort of data. And I think you've also got to consider what data that you're going to warehouse. Are you going to warehouse credit card information? Because then that gets into PCI compliance. Are you going to be warehousing PII? Are you going to be warehousing HIPAA information? You have to understand the data that you're going to be warehousing, and then understand what security constraints may exist upon that data and what regulations that you have to abide by. So those are huge topics to discuss. I will say one thing, though, that I think is extraordinarily critical when you think about cloud warehousing solutions regarding data security is remembering the CIA triad, right? So the CIA triad is what drives cybersecurity. So it's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So if we can meet the three key pillars of the CIA triad, then we have a really good format or form in order to be able to evaluate our solution or our platform. How are we going to be able to monitor the confidentiality of our data? Is it through role-based access control? Where are there any vulnerabilities? How do we validate the integrity of our data? So is there a plausibility that there could be packet injection midway between our pipeline from on-prem into the actual warehousing solution? Because then that violates the integrity. And then availability. How available is it? What's the SLA? Can we access it when we need it? And then you think about from a business continuity and disaster recovery perspective. It's great to have your data somewhere that's not your data center, right? Because if your data center fails, then what are you going to do? Well, you should already have those DR or BC plans in place, but it never hurts to have another layer of that. And then when you think about more modern solutions, especially like Snowflake, and you can do things like private link, connecting an on-prem VPN directly into Azure, which then goes directly into Snowflake. So realistically, it never leaves an internal network. So there's a lot of cool ways that you can go about this, But I think that keeping those cybersecurity principles in mind while doing it is key.
Mhm. Okay. And I, I have the impression that with all the experience that you may have been part of projects where you have to move from an on-prem system into the cloud, right? Maybe Snowflake, maybe some other tool. So what are these projects, how did they look like? Is it like um, complicated to orchestrate and organize? Is it better? Is it good to, if you have access to people who actually know where's the data and what is it all about? Or have you faced perhaps some situations where you need to actually go and explore like from scratch what's in there and try to make sense out of the data? Are these projects complicated, and what would be, a good approach to try to execute these kind of migrations?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna put on my PM hat for a couple of minutes here, because
Mhm.
I do have my PMP and I do actually teach PMP classes on the side. So
Nice.
when it comes to planning these projects, the number one thing is you have to consider what that discovery phase looks like. So you're talking about, is everything known about what is stored inside the source system? And I would say 99.9% of the time, that is a hard no, because so many source systems have UDEF fields or user-defined fields. So
Mhm.
understanding what, especially if it's an older source system, 10, 15 years, what have those UDEF fields been used for in the past? And then what are they going to correlate to once they get into a warehousing solution? I think that discovery phase is absolutely critical when you're migrating or moving any data to a cloud solution. You have to understand what's contained within it and then how to manage it. So we already talked about like all the regulations that could be imposed upon various types of data. So that discovery phase is number one. That's the most critical. Then number two, understanding from a technological perspective. Does that make sense to fully migrate? Or should it just be a warehousing solution that you're holding data in for analytical value because you don't want to, run monstrous queries against your operational database throughout the day? Case in point, you run a monstrous query against your operational database in the middle of the day, and then accounting can't perform functions in it. That's a problem, right? So we want to offload that work as much as humanly possible. And how do we do that? We can use cloud data solutions, we can use replicated servers, we can use a lot of different things. But when you think about migration to the cloud, you got to make sure that it makes sense. I'm very pro cloud, but I'm also understanding that sometimes there's a use case for on-prem. But that doesn't mean that your
Mhm.
data always has to live there. You can always warehouse it in a cloud solution. I would say, there's just a lot of different factors to take into consideration. So before you even start a project like that, discovery is the most critical thing. Understand your technical components, understand your data, understand the ramifications of moving to a cloud solution versus on-prem, if there are any. Working previously for a resort management company, it's very remote. So the plausibility of losing internet is very real, right?
Mhm.
Especially when you're on top of a mountain. So you lose internet, what happens to the cloud solution? Nothing wrong with the cloud solution, but you're going to lose access to it.
Mm.
So, when you think about core systems for business continuity and disaster recovery, some considerations to make.
Right. Yeah, that's also a great point of view because we are so used to just, use our cloud tools and have readily um, internet connection available, right? And and sometimes we don't even think about it, like what happens if it goes away, right? Then what? So yeah, that's something really worth considering. Okay, and now since we are creating more and more data, right, and that keeps just growing, I would say exponentially. Um, what happens in the future to these kind of solutions? Do you think they can kill? They can keep scaling up and still coping with that sort of data load, or do you envision any kind of difference in the way that we will be gathering and processing all of that data that we are just creating, and seems to don't have any limit, right? Like any end in sight.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a limit, right? Everything has a limit. But
Mhm.
as we continue to grow technology, I think those limits are getting higher and higher. Classically, we were whatever you could fit in your hard drive, in your on-prem server, and you throw 64 cores at it with, 64 gigs of RAM, and you're off to the races for the most part until you get, 100 sequential queries, and then SQL Server is like, no, I'm not doing that today. So, cloud solutions have come a long way. They bring a lot of power with the scalability to just, normally all my warehouses I run, to be honest, are extra small. I don't need a lot of that. But if there were ever a case where I was running a machine learning model or an AI model, or I was running an extraordinarily large workload that I needed to process much more quickly, then I can scale that up to a small or a medium. But to keep costs down, because that's another factor that you have to consider with cloud warehousing solutions, you want to do what's right for the organization, but you also want to make sure you're doing what's right for the data load. So, again, I've never had to scale past the small, but there's definite workloads out there that could easily scale to a medium, large, or potentially even an extra large warehouse. And that would be very interesting to see how long those sort of things would take. So, but yeah, that's kind of my spiel on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And since you were sharing with us these applications that we may have from the data warehousing into AI, right? Could you tell us more about your experience? I mean, that's like the hottest topic right now, right? Speaking about AI. So how is it when you're dealing with these kind of projects, and what has been the outcome that you guys have seen while taking the data into AI models?
Sure. A lot of times when people think about AI, their first thoughts are LLMs, right? Like
Hmm.
ChatGPT or Llama, but there's so much more to it. So when you think about data models and AI models, um, I would say one of the coolest use cases that I've actually been a part of was we were doing a sustainability uh, program, whereas that we were collecting all sorts of data from going into smart electronics, whether that's a smart thermostat, more environmentally friendly appliances, so on and so forth, just to see what that would have as an impact on the actual resort itself. So with that being said, we took into consideration the uh, the electricity and all of the other utilities. And then, of course, we started with a subset of units that we would then be able to scale up. So by being able to take that subset of units and gather data from it and build a model based on the outcomes of those specific units, then we were able to run some predictions on what that would look like from an ROI on a more scalable perspective, right? So now we're taking what our sample was, and then evaluating that against the rest of it, just to see what that would look like before we make, a multi-million-dollar investment. But that was probably one of the coolest projects to see come to fruition, was just being able to evaluate that across.
Hmm. Yeah, that sounds super cool. So perhaps if you can share some more details. I was curious about how big was your team by the time that you were working on this project? Was it like really big, and there were like many specialists, or was
No.
it more like, you
So
know?
it was myself and another data engineer.
Cool. Okay. And what were like your roles? One of you were playing the AI specialist role, or the both of you have this kind of knowledge?
Yeah, so she was more on actually getting uh, the bills into the database, which would just include using Snowflake Cortex's Document AI to get everything loaded, and then so that way that I could create the model and then actually start doing some predictive analytics.
Cool. And just for the record, how large was the data set that you guys use? Is it like something that you really need to have like a big amount of data, or do you consider that maybe you need just the particular set of data that you may need, but you don't need that much data just for this kind of experiments?
We definitely had a couple million rows for it, just because of the mere fact of the matter, what you want to see is you want to see up to the point in which that you implement the change, and then track it for a few months after the change, and then compare that to the other entities in the data set. So that way that you get a really good comparison overall, and then you can start to model it out from there. But just doing up until the change and then the change and not really tracking it, you're going to have less of an accuracy percentage because you don't have as much to actually base it off of. So what we were looking for was we were looking for something a little bit more accurate.
Mhm. All right, that's great. And I see that we are almost there in terms of the time, but could you share with us some particular resources where we can learn more about data warehousing in general, Snowflake, and maybe some other resources that you have found lately that you really liked and enjoyed? So maybe we can know more about the topic.
Oh,
Yeah, and
absolutely.
also, sorry,
Yes.
Matthew, just to add to this question, also, what would be some like first steps that someone wants to follow if we want to become a data analyst specialist?
Sure. So I'll hit your question first, Gabby, and then I'll get yours, Edgar. So if you want to become a data
Yeah.
analyst, there's really three core pillars, right? Three core pillars to being a data analyst is number one, understanding data and data modeling, data cleansing. So understanding that transformation layer. Secondarily, understanding some sort of language, whether that's Python or SQL, or even if you just want to start something really basic, start in Excel. Excel is still a really great tool for analyzing data, and it doesn't require a lot of specialty skills to get started. And then understanding how to visualize it, how to tell a story. So, do you understand how to present data in such a way that it's meaningful and that it makes sense to everyone? So, understanding your audience, right? So, there's such a people component to data analytics that people don't really understand. We always talk about the technical components, but there's a very large people component. So, I would say those are some great first steps. For learning more regarding Snowflake, Snowflake has a great Academy website that's online, and they have some free courses that you can take. Learning data warehousing in general, I would recommend looking up the medallion architecture through Databricks. They go into a really great spiel on what bronze, silver, and gold, how it works, what it means. And then from just learning overall technology or anything like that, I think that one of the things that really helped me when I was first getting started, especially in data analytics, is Coursera offers a Google Data Analytics Professional Certificate. It's a great program, takes you 5-6 months to complete, but it goes through every single layer of what that I've kind of outlined here for analysts. And then there's also courses for data engineers or data scientists. So you can really get a more holistic view of those sort of things on there.
Cool.
Amazing.
And
Well,
one final question before
okay.
we go.
Yeah.
So how important is it that you have a strong mathematical background for pursuing this career?
So mathematics and statistics become really important in data science and understanding the various types of models and how they interact with each other. But when we talk about getting started with data analytics or data engineering, understanding the core concepts of mathematical functions, understanding some finance or accounting functions is great. If you don't, you can learn. So if you're driven enough to reach out and start to learn, then you'll be successful in this venture. You don't need to be a PhD in stats in order to be successful. So, some basic math skills and some openness to learning, and you'll be okay.
Great.
All right.
All right, Matthew, it's been a pleasure hearing such a great professional in this area with all of this experience. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for the questions we got. Edgar, your questions are always great as well. Thank you everyone that joined us. Hope you enjoyed this session. Anything that you want to say before we wrap it up, Matthew?
Oh, just thanks everybody for joining. Thanks, Gabby. Thanks to Edgar. It was a pleasure. And then, feel free, you can find me on LinkedIn at Matthew Harris PMP. Feel free to connect, and look forward to seeing you all on the other side.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Amazing. We had such a great time. Thank you.